The topic for my multivariate presentation is the attitudes towards the definition of marriage. The research question is, what is society's opinion on the definition of marriage? The purpose is to find out if people are more tolerant today about same-sex marriages and if generational differences account for a shift in opinions and greater tolerance. A standard regression analysis will be conducted using 3 variables for the analytic approach. The rationale behind this research question was driven by the desire to understand if the legal definition of marriage replicates Canadian society's overall view towards the gay community and the marriage rights they possess. It seems as though there has been greater exposure and more voluntary associations pertaining to the gay community, not only in Canada but also worldwide. Therefore, more exposure should lead to greater tolerance and support for same-sex marriages. In 2005, the Civil Marriage Act was enacted, which defined marriage, for civil purposes, being the lawful union of 2 persons. Thus, conducting a regression analysis will help determine whether society accepts the newly amended definition of marriage compared to the traditional definition of marriage being between a man and woman only. Sociologists Edward Grabb and James Curtis also discussed tolerance in voluntary associations. They claim that those involved in voluntary associations tend to have a greater acceptance towards outgroups. It is revealed that education is positively related to involvement in voluntary associations, and that age has a curvilinear relationship to involvement, with middle-aged persons being the most likely to join, followed by older people. Robert Anderson and Tina Fentner also discussed tolerance towards homosexuals. They write, given that higher education tends to expose people to different types of lifestyles and ideas, it is not surprising that a long-standing finding shows a positive relationship between education and social tolerance. The dataset being used is the Conservative Values 2010 survey. The dependent variable being used is question 17 of the survey pertaining to the definition of marriage. The question reads, using a scale of 1 to 7, where 1 is totally disagree and 7 is totally agree, tell me how you feel about marriage by definition can only take place between a man and woman. This dependent variable will determine whether those in the survey are more or less supportive of same-sex marriages. Recodes were not made for this variable, however missing values will be declared for the small amount of respondents who replied do not know. The first independent variable being used is question 1 of the survey measuring age, where the possible responses are those between 18 and 30, 31 and 40, 41 and 50, 51 and 64, and 65 and over. Missing values were not declared and recodes were not necessary. It is hypothesized that as age increases, the more one agrees with the traditional definition of marriage being between a man and woman only. This makes them less supportive of same-sex marriages. Those in older age categories may not have been as exposed to same-sex marriages as the newer generations have, making them less tolerant to a shift in values for a new definition of marriage following Bill C-38. The second independent variable being used is question 56 of the survey measuring education, where the possible responses are high school or less, college, undergraduate, and postgraduate university. Missing values will be declared for those who refuse to answer the question. It is hypothesized that as education increases, those who agree that marriage is between a man and woman only decreases, showing support for same-sex marriages. The more education one has, the more likely they are to be aware of the difficulties the gay community faces, as well as the different movements pertaining to gay rights. This ultimately leads to a stronger support. The third and final independent variable being used is question 15 of the survey pertaining to family values. The question reads, using a scale of 1 to 7 where 1 is totally disagree and 7 is totally agree, tell me how you feel about nothing being more important than family. This variable will help determine whether those who have strong family values either oppose or support same-sex marriages. It is hypothesized that those who have strong family values will agree that marriage ought to be between a man and woman only. They may believe in the traditional nuclear family with a husband and wife whose sole purpose is to naturally procreate. Therefore, those who agree that nothing is more important than family will oppose same-sex marriages. A regression analysis was conducted predicting opinions of the definition of marriage with age, education, and family values. Several conclusions can be drawn from the results. Firstly, the adjusted R-squared indicates that 5.8% of the variance has been explained in the relationship. Further, after looking at the significance of the overall equation using the F-score, the result of 0 suggests that the relationships are not likely due to sampling error. However, the individual significance scores reveal that both age and education had high values, implying that they are insignificant. This leaves family values along with the constant to be the only significant variables in the equation. Additionally, the tolerance levels for each of the variables allow us to conclude that there is no problem of multicollinearity. The beta values in the regression support all 3 of the hypotheses. Since a standardized unit of measure has been used, we can see that family values had the greatest impact and highest significance for people agreeing with the definition of marriage being between a man and woman only. Therefore, both the beta and B values support the previous hypotheses. These values indicate that the older one is, the least likely they are to support same-sex marriage. Generational differences can be accounted for the influence. Further, as one received a higher education, their acceptance and tolerance for same-sex marriages increase as well. Lastly, the more one agrees that nothing is more important than family, the less one supports same-sex marriage. The regression analysis allows us to compare the results with the previous literature. We can conclude that despite the legal definition of marriage being between two persons, there is not a unanimous support of every individual in Canadian society. Thus, Bill C-38 can be seen as a policy in which not everyone supports. Grab and Curtis should suggest that age is curvilinear to involvement in voluntary associations. However, this was not found in the regression. Thus, there is not a direct correlation between involvement in voluntary associations and support for same-sex marriages. Lastly, the statements of Anderson and Fentner support the hypothesis. Greater education has exposed more people towards different lifestyles, including those of the gay community. Given that little variance was explained, one can conclude that other factors must be included. Such factors could include religious affiliation, because certain religions may be more or less supportive for same-sex marriages, partisanship, being left or right, as well as gender. A hierarchical approach with these variables should also be used to see if it has a vast effect on the relationship. The syntax has been provided for the regression analysis. Thank you for your time and interest, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation.